Hi everyone. In previous centuries, people often suffered horrendously, but they didn't reject God because of their suffering. However, today, suffering can throw us into a crisis of unbelief. Why is that? I want to speak with you today about the way we approach suffering in the West and how we can learn from our ancestors about how to think about and cope with suffering. Let's get into it. In medieval Europe, approximately 1 in 5 children died before reaching their first birthday, and only half of all children survived to the age of 18. People suffered far more than we do in the West today, and yet there are huge numbers of journals and diaries and historical documents showing how people in previous generations coped with their suffering, often far better than we do in the West today. In 1666, a man called William Mompesson persuaded his village to self-quarantine to stop the plague from spreading. Eventually, his wife, Catherine, tragically died from the plague herself. And in one of his diary entries after her death, he said this remarkable sentence: "I have found God more good than ever I thought or imagined." There was clear grief and trauma about what he'd gone through, but his suffering didn't seem to throw him into a crisis of unbelief. Why was that? Ultimately, it was because his Christian faith enabled him to see meaning in his suffering. Not that suffering is somehow good in itself, but that suffering served a purpose in a bigger narrative in his life. In contrast to that, modern Western cultures have tended to assume that the material world is all that there is, and therefore the meaning of life is having the freedom to choose a life that makes you happy. But if the pursuit of happiness is the meaning of life, what role can suffering have? On this view, suffering takes away the things that make us happy, and therefore what meaning can there be? This helps to explain why suffering can throw us into a crisis of unbelief in the West. If the meaning of life is having the freedom to choose a life that makes us happy, it's easy to slip into thinking that if God is going to have credibility, God needs to serve as a function of our own comfort and pleasure. But clearly, if God is God, we can't simply co-opt God to serve as a project of our own preconceived ideas of meaning. In fact, I think that on some level, we know that life must have a meaning that is bigger than the pursuit of happiness. For example, imagine stories like Lord of the Rings if Frodo never left the Shire, never experienced hardship or suffering. There would be no story to tell. Imagine Harry Potter not having the suffering and pain of his story woven into that narrative. It would make for a poor story, wouldn't it? Imagine a children's story that said, once upon a time there was a king and a peasant. They were comfortable and happy, the end. I think the reason our ancestors weren't thrown into unbelief by suffering is because they grasped that the meaning of life is about so much more than the pursuit of our own happiness. They grasped that life is about knowing and worshipping God, and that while suffering is overwhelming and incredibly difficult, it can be something that God uses to make us into something great and beautiful, even if we can't see how at the time. For me as a Christian, the story I look to for meaning is the death, resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ. And I found this to be a powerful resource to cope with suffering, because it tells me, no matter what pit of suffering I'm going through, no matter what cross I'm carrying, I follow one who was raised back to life and who will therefore help me through any season of suffering I go through. It may be that you're really struggling at the moment in lockdown, maybe with your mental health, maybe financial insecurity. In Jesus, God has come into the midst of suffering to be with us in our suffering and ultimately to deliver us from suffering. And I believe if you ask Him to help you, He will. I'm Matt White, this is Skeptic Space. If you'd like to read more into this massive issue of suffering, I would highly recommend Tim Keller's book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. It's an excellent book that touches on the personal but also the philosophical issues surrounding suffering. It's outstanding and by far the best book I have read on this topic. I would highly recommend it. If you're finding these videos helpful, then consider liking and subscribing and stay tuned for more videos looking at the big questions about God and faith. See you soon.